Native Connections Training and Technical Assistance webinar, To Live to See the Great Day That Dawns, Part 1. We'll start in just a moment, but first let's review some housekeeping items. Please add your full name to the participant list on the left by using the drop-down menu in the upper right-hand corner of the attendee box. That will open a small menu where you can choose Edit My Info to enter your first and last name and your program name. All phone lines will be muted, but we encourage you to use the chat box for questions or comments. At the end of the webinar, we'll have a question and answer session so the presenters can respond to these. My name is B.C. Echohawk, and this is a SAMHSA Native Connections grantee webinar. Along with the Native Connections team and our SAMHSA contracting officer representatives, Maureen Madison and Jan Dunbar Cooper, we thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, today we'll be discussing the Suicide Prevention Guide, To Live to See the Great Day That Dawns, and this is part 1 of a conversation that we'll have about this resource. Our webinar lead today is Gary Newman, one of our Native Connections grantee technical assistants, and joining him will be Kim Viju, the managing partner and founder for Wolf River Consulting. Before we begin, though, we'd like to open in a good way, and doing that for us today is our colleague and grantee technical assistant, Hunter Genia. Hunter?
Bonjour. Viewsan Additional Cause, Wabajan Shido Dam, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and Dojaba. Wabajan Shi, Do Dam. Kinigay Wayan, Monpi Oma, Nangom. At this time, I'd like to open this up with the song that is asking that Megize, that ego, to carry our prayers on its wings to the Creator on our behalf. And I'd like to extend this to all of our grantees that are listening in, and wish you good blessings for today. Miigwech. Gary, back to you.
Thank you very much, Hunter. Aho. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar today. It's an honor to be co-presenting with a colleague of mine, Kim Viju. Kim, would you just give a brief introduction and maybe even how you came to be a part of developing this guide and the importance?
Thank you, Gary. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Kim Viju. I am the owner of Wolf River Consulting. I am a member of the Oneida Tribe of Wisconsin and a descendant of Menominee. I reside outside of Chicago, Illinois. I am a former colleague of Gary's and many of the people who participate in the Native Connections Project. I came to work on this guide as the communications director with the Native Aspirations Project, which was a project on suicide prevention, youth violence, and bullying that started about 10 years ago. So I came into this work midway through the development of the guide and helped another colleague complete the remainder of the research and working out some of the final pieces so that it could be inclusive of all cultures throughout Indian country, and also include like a range of resources for urban and rural communities, as well as federal resources, and as well as training and curriculum that could be useful for communities implementing this work. So I'm glad to see that over the years, the guide has still been in use, and very grateful to have the opportunity to share it with everyone on the call today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I was working with Kaufman and Associates when the guide was being developed and had many opportunities to review some of the pieces and different chapters and different elements of the guide. And I have always felt that it is one of the most useful tools that I have had in working with suicide prevention. There are so many tips and so many interesting pieces in here that I never considered before. And that's what we're going to do a little bit today, is just have a conversation about the first 3 chapters of the guide, which explore the myths and barriers. And then we're going to examine how suicide reflects the many cultural forces. And then we're going to explore some of the cultural issues around prevention. And this photograph here is the front page of the guide. So if you don't know what we're talking about, this is the guide, that's the front page, and you can download this. There'll be a slide later where you'll be able to download it. And if you want 10 or 20 copies of this, SAMHSA will send them to you. And you can just send me an email, and I will forward it on to get them sent to you. I've sent them to all the grantees that I work with, but it's really a useful tool and something that I feel very strongly about. We do know that suicide is preventable. Communities, we're finding, are implementing different programs that, are successful in reducing factors that are known to contribute to suicide by young people, and also strengthen factors known to help protect them against suicide. These approaches are based on the public health model, meaning that they're proactive and holistic. These approaches, I think they do more than help young people choose life. They also help young people choose to live their life well, full of hope in themselves and their ability to accept the challenge and gifts that life has to offer. Kim, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. The next section talks about the content and the structure of the guide. The content of this guide reflects the wisdom, the guidance, and the expertise provided by many communities across Indian country. The development of the content in this guide was taken over a few years of listening sessions and community meetings, and is really shaped by the people that it serves. While much of the content may seem to only apply to American Indians and Alaska Natives living on reservations and in villages, there's a great deal of information in it that's applicable to preventing suicide in urban communities. You'll see throughout the guide that they make reference to, you know, the remoteness of communities, but then they'll refer back to how some of the curriculum or some of the tools can be applied to urban communities. The guide is organized to help readers understand the complex process of developing suicide prevention plans, and this is a very important component that it's developed within a cultural context. So one, it explores risk and protective factors and the ways in which American Indian and Alaska Native cultures can help promote the mental health of a community's young people. Two, it's intended to help break down the silence and the myths that often surround suicide, and those that are barriers to a community's open discussions and how they can discuss potential solutions. And last, it deals specifically with actions that a community can take after a death by suicide. Young people appear to be particularly susceptible to suicide behavior when exposed to a suicide death of another person. As a result, this guide provides a community's effective response to one's suicide that may help prevent others. Gary?
Yeah. Some of the overlapping themes of the guide, one is resilience. You know, it recognizes and pays honor to the resilience of our communities in resisting cultural suppression, overcoming a legacy of historical trauma. In many cases, by revitalizing their culture and drawing upon their traditional values, beliefs, and practices, the guide acknowledges historical trauma as one of the underlying and continuing threat to the balance and harmony of our communities. You know, while some communities already have begun the courageous process of healing from historical trauma, other communities have yet to open up about this painful subject. Where healing circles have been held within small groups, the hope is that healing will move into the entire community, where all can benefit from the natural strengths and the resources of its members. For many communities, healing from historical trauma is the first step in dealing with the causes of suicide. Kim?
Okay. The second theme is empowerment, and the guide recognizes the power of each community in developing the most appropriate responses to suicide and its related risk factors. This theme demonstrates respect for the diversity of American Indian and Alaska Native communities and the strength of each culture. It provides guidelines on prevention planning on the basis that the people closest to the community and its culture will know best which programs to choose, which ones to implement, and which to sustain.
The final is hope. This theme is based on an awareness of the power of hope in a future that is grounded in faith and derived from the intimate understanding of the cycles of nature. It's the natural continuity of spring following the winter and of a world that turns towards the dawn that becomes the foundation for a young person's hope in the future. It doesn't offer universal solutions to a problem. It's more important for this guide to raise questions about what we still need to learn from our communities about prevention than to offer one solution. And we trust that this guide, which is offered in the spirit of honoring and preserving the uniqueness of individual tribes and villages, will be an acceptable starting point for discovery. And that's the important piece. This is just a starting point. We've known that many communities apply for some kind of a suicide prevention grant, and there's a suicide prevention or a team that is hired, and the community then looks to them to be the gurus, so to speak, of suicide. And what this guide does, it gives those individuals a place to start with their communities, a place to ask the questions and to find out what culture the community responds to that can be effective. There's a quote from an anonymous Inuit, and he said, "I think over again my small adventures, my fears, those small ones that seemed so big, for all the vital things I had to get and reach. And yet there is only one great thing, the only thing, to live to see the great day that dawns and the light that fills the world." This next quote here is one that came from a Hopi elder. "Time to speak your truth. Create your community and don't look outside yourself for the leaders. We are the ones that we've been waiting for." Kim?
Hi. So a big part of the guide talks about the concept of culture and incorporating culture into your prevention plans. And culture is the sum of our total ways of living. And these ways of living are developed by a group of people to assure its survival in a particular physical and human environment. Culture and the people that are a part of it interact so that culture is not static. It is a response of a group of human beings' needs of its members, and it has an inherent logic and balance between positive and negative dimensions. These include like values, beliefs, aesthetic standards, linguistic expression, patterns of thinking, behavioral norms. And society's perception of suicide and its cultural traditions can influence the suicide rate. And throughout the section, the guide mentions a few studies that talk about how there has been success in reducing suicide in communities that incorporate culture. So suicide rates vary greatly by community. While some communities have experienced suicide rate as much as 10 times the national rate, others have rates that are much lower than the national rate. So it looks into what explains this variation. It's the perception of suicide and the cultural traditions that influence the rate. So it could be the protective factors, risk factors, and the barriers to the conversation.
Thanks, Kim. Mm-hmm. Throughout the guide, as Kim said, we want to acknowledge individual cultures. Suicide prevention efforts need to acknowledge the cultural context of each individual community, to include each community's unique risk and protective factors and how the community understands and discusses and experiences suicide and suicidal behavior. Kim?
Research suggests that one of the strongest factors that protect youth and young adults against suicide behavior is their sense of belonging to their culture and to their community. To that end, the idea that a loss of culture or community can cause a loss of well-being. Native cultural identity gives purpose and meaning to their lives. Storytelling is a traditional form for Native peoples. Oral histories and legends were used to transmit knowledge, teachings, and values from one generation to the next. We use storytelling today. Many of us have used digital storytelling in our communities to convey the same teachings as we look to do our work in prevention. These stories can help us feel more connected to the place where we live, and feeling more connected to a place gives us a better understanding, not just a mental understanding, but an emotional understanding. This emotional understanding and connection helps us feel we are more part of things and to care for our place. On the other end of things, it's not easy to care when you don't have a connection to that place.
One of our tribal elders from my reservation, the Flathead Reservation in Montana, and I want to honor him, Bearhead Soini. He has passed, but what he would do, he would take his pickup and he would drive around the reservation in the different communities, and if he saw youth just kind of hanging out and he knew them and he knew their families, he would ask them to just get in his pickup. And he would drive around the reservation and show them places that their great-grandparents, their elders, their ancestors lived or maybe homesteaded, or said, did you know that your great-grandmother used to have a lodge here? That was where the family celebrated. And what this did that the families weren't sharing with these youth, it made them feel like they belonged to the community, that they belonged to the reservation. And as Kim said, it's easier to care for something when you have a connection to it. And you're likely to take care of it. The next, cultural continuity. This is a very important piece. Communities need to have control over education, police, health delivery systems. Having a sense of having some control over one's life and feeling empowered can be a very powerful protective factor. Cultural continuity, the power of the storytelling. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay. When youth have a secure sense of the past, present, and future of their culture, it's easier for them to develop and maintain a sense of connectedness to their own future. For example, the guide describes First Nation research that tribes and villages had established within their communities certain officially recognized cultural facilities that help preserve and enrich their cultural lives. Those communities had lower suicide rates. And this is mentioned throughout the guide. There's research on communities that have had success. Gary?
Thank you. Another important piece is the individual continuity. Like, how does a child growing from adolescence into adulthood understand they're the same person? What is the story of their life is an important piece that helps with belonging and helps with protective factors. How is this story understood and told? If youth are growing up with these kinds of protective factors, they can be strong in helping them in the future. Continuing with individual continuity, the narrative connects them to who they were in the past, who they are now, who they will become in the future. It's a very important one. You're thinking of the snake shedding its skin. It's still the same snake. What is part of that story? Next, we go into self-continuity. A detailed discussion of this theory and supporting evidence can be found in a series of articles by researchers, and it's available online. And we'll have some of those connections and links for you at the end of the webinar. There's a need for the personal narrative. Culture is the foundation of a personal identity. We know that. Our elders have told us that. Are we getting so far away from that today that we're not remembering that's a foundation? Without it, the ground upon which a coherent sense of self is ordinarily made to rest is cut away. Life is made cheap, and this prospect of one's own death becomes a matter of indifference. Looking at cultural continuity again, Chandler and Lalonde said First Native communities that succeed in taking steps to preserve their heritage and culture and work to control their own destinies are dramatically more successful in insulating their youth against suicide. We know this. Kim?
The next slide is questions for the seeking the wisdom of elders, and you'll see this throughout the guide. What it is a series of questions that were used to help facilitate the suicide conversation and to get people to think about prevention and promotion. One, talking about the protective factors, but also talking about the barriers and how they can overcome them, and what traditional practices have been used to help people either contemplating suicide or for people who have been impacted by the death of a loved one. And just throughout, from working on this guide and working with communities right after the guide was published, quite a few communities had taken these out and used them as handouts. They're very useful for facilitating a conversation or getting the conversation started. And passed them out when they were at community meetings. They handed them out when they had youth and elder gatherings. And I highly recommend everyone taking a look at them and using them as a reference in how your communities can get the conversation started.
And now we would like to go into some polling questions where we'd like you to take an opportunity to read the question and then respond to the particular polling question. I've used these in many of the communities I work with, just like Kim said, and hand them out. And the youth are asking these questions of the elders and gathering this information and learning a lot of new things. Oftentimes when we ask youth their thoughts, we really learn some wonderful things. So the first question we're going to ask, you'll see the highlighted ones on here, highlighted in brown. Those are the questions we would like you to read and then respond to. There is I can't see it on my slide. Maybe someone can help me. Where will people respond with their answers to these polling questions? To the right of the slide, there should be a box that comes up that says answer polling questions here. So you would type in your answers there. The first one, for example, how did elders help community members overcome past traumas and maintain cultural identity? On my reservation in Montana, I'll share a little bit while you're responding. The Culture Committee and the Longhouse are something that have been traditional and have had talking circles and conversations ongoing, inviting the community and the youth to talk about how their culture can help protect them. They don't wait until something happens, but the elders made themselves available to the community to be able to give them a sense of being invited in, that it's okay to come to me and ask and talk about questions. I think traditionally that's one of the things our communities used to do. It was safe to go and talk to someone, and maybe we've gotten away from some of that. The second set, I'm getting some responses. Wonderful. And forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong. Dana Barrios. ceremony and other cultural practices. Tori Whipple, Wapakani ceremonies with the youth, using ceremony to wipe the trauma off the youth, and they come out of the ceremony renewed. Traditional practices, this comes from Isabel Pena. Woodhouse, root digging, berry picking, using these places to share cultural wisdom and direction. Thanks, Izzy. How will community members help to feel good about themselves is the second question. And the third, what can be said to young people to give them greater hope in themselves and their future? Lisa Schumann, talking circles, digital storytelling, traditional teaching. Mark Goki, went to court for treaty rights. Yeah. Eugene Landlord, I remember that if someone was having problems, several elders would visit them and either give them advice or just be there. Dolly Holly. Hi, Dolly. Our native elders would encourage a person to follow traditional values. They would have other elders talk to you as well. Josie. Hi, Josie. They taught life skills that included guidance on loss. They always spoke to people, giving support and encouragement. They set the foundation for our identity. Absolutely. Look at all the knowledge and all of the wisdom that we're getting just by asking these questions here. Hunter, create safety by identifying emotions and feelings, which many of our people don't like to do. Offer water, smudge, sweatgrass, sweetgrass, talking circles, and sweats. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Gary, I'm going to jump in and add something that from my community that incorporates both of these questions. The Menominee Indian School District in Wisconsin is moving away from, traditional conventional forms of punishment and discipline in schools, and they have elders that serve in the schools as grandmothers or grandfathers. And the youth, when they are, feeling bad or having a bad day or need some comfort, they can go to these elders and work out, these emotions and have a safe place to go. And within that, they're having they're passing on their culture. They're learning from these elders. And it really creates a safe environment versus, negative experiences and discipline.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you, Kim. And I think you said a key word there, safe. We need to create safe places in our communities for these conversations to happen. Dolly said, when they talk to you, they don't judge you or put you down. They had great strength to share with you. Julia Russ, many of our elders are raising their grandchildren. This is not an easy task, so we provide support to our elders as well. That's wonderful. Dolly, our elders told us not to look too much into the future. They encouraged us to live in the moment. And I think that's how our ancestors needed to live, was in the moment. Marcia Lovato, in our community, the elders are always teaching the youth within their own homes by talking about what is important to our culture and traditional doings, also how to keep it going strong. I know one of our projects on the Flathead Reservation was the Blue Bay Healing Center, and a lot of our youth and adults were going off reservation to treatment and coming back to treatment and relapsing because nothing changed in the community. And so the first thing we did is we went out to elders and gifted them with a Pendleton and asked them questions. If you could pass on 3 things to your children or grandchildren or unborn nieces or nephews, what would those 3 things be? And we used their answers to develop a program that supported the community. We did it in a good way. We did it by offering them something when we asked for their wisdom. Marcia Lovato, in our community, the elders are always teaching the youth within their own homes by talking about what is important to our culture and traditional doings. That's the second time I read that, Marcia. Sorry. But thank you. Do other people have questions or responses that they'd like to add here? We've got plenty of time. I see other people typing. Does anyone have anything they wanted to add, any of our team? DC, Lori, Hunter? Feel free to chime in. Just by asking these questions here, it really is information that we're gathering that is all protective information. And it's wonderful that this guide put out that kind of information and questions. At the end of each chapter, you'll find a set of these questions. We're only reviewing 3 chapters today. Celeste, Washington. In my community, my elders teach the youth that what to learn, how to hunt, and gather food from the tundra. They have the best stories to tell us about hunting and fishing because they have all this wisdom. Yeah, when you're out there doing something with Grandma, there's always a story. There's always a lesson. There's always a learning, and we need to keep those alive. Still see that people are typing, so I want to pay honor with your time.
We have one more. Julia Russ. We wanted to mention our cultural mentoring youth camp. Most of the mentors are elders, and the time spent during the camp is so powerful. The youth are kind and patient and respectful, working and learning. Looks like we have some more typing. But
one of the communities I work with, one of their cultural campsites had not been used in years, and the program took the youth out there to a camp, and the youth cleaned it up. They even built, added on to the shelters, and the elders were so pleased that they allowed them to use it anytime. Eugene Landlord said, everyone participated in subsistence gathering. All had responsibilities. No one was left out. Dolly Holly, our late relatives would sing native songs to us. They would tell us stories of long ago that kept us intact with our past native values. And with relocation and moving off of original lands, some of those stories have been lost, and we need to revitalize them. We can still do it. See, the people are still typing, so thank you. We'll take one more, and then we'll go ahead and move on. Josephine Edmond, they were very connected. Each was valued. Perfect. Okay, moving on. Kim?
the next section is about having the suicide conversation, and this is a very prominent theme within the guide, and there's a lot of information throughout the guide, including these questions that we just went over, about why it's so important to start the conversation. It's important to acknowledge that some communities may feel that there are religious or spiritual beliefs that govern the appropriateness of the conversation. Many of our belief systems contain rules that guide how and whom we can have this conversation with. These are traditions to respect as part of creating a cultural suicide prevention plan. It's also important for a community to overcome these barriers in its own way and within its own specific cultural context. The barriers surrounding the suicide conversation can apply to those contemplating suicide, those that are responding to a suicide, and those that are hoping to prevent one. The discussion throughout this guide is not just about creating prevention plans, but it applies to how family members can have this conversation, you know, how practitioners and clinicians, everybody that plays a role and lives within the community. The guide gives them some guidance on where what their role is and how they can facilitate this discussion and how they can help. So, like, for example, it asks, like, how can a father ask his son if he's considering suicide? Or how can someone express to a loved one that they're contemplating suicide? Throughout the guide, it gives examples on how each of these scenarios facilitate or need a discussion.
Thank you, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
Having that conversation, it's very important, and even asking permission to have that conversation is also very important. Finding a cultural language. We find ourselves forced to speak about our health with language and concepts that are foreign to us and not our own. Finding ways in which everyone can understand and discuss suicide is critical to holding the suicide discussion and then developing a prevention plan. For some, suicide is forbidden in their traditional cultures, and to take one's own life will cause the soul to remain in a state of distress. Other cultures have accepted, and some may still accept, suicide as honorable when a person's death is an atonement for shame they brought onto themselves and their families. Maybe a protest against injustice, a form of martyrdom, or a show of devotion for a great cause or religion. An exercise of a person's right to choose how and when he or she will die. Maybe a show of bravery when one charges an enemy who has superior weapons. And a demonstration of selflessness, as when a person has gone far out into the snow to die so that others may share what little food is available and live. Those are some of the cultural, individual stories and lessons and things that we need to have this conversation about. You know, some of these definitions we use are too narrow. We do need to remember that balance of the fire and the water, the male and the female, the light and the dark, be able to see this in a holistic way. And in Alaska, for example, the subsistence and the environment and nature are such a big part of individuals' lives that those kinds of things need to be taken into consideration when we begin having this conversation. They can be a barrier to the discussion. Kim?
Thanks, Carrie. Just as we discussed before, culture plays a big part in preventing suicide, but culture can also be a barrier to having the conversation. And there are a number of factors that play a part in this, and that includes historical trauma, guilt and shame, personal pain, community, collective grief, and then politeness and respect. And first, looking at historical trauma, it's a risk factor that affects multiple generations. It's discussed in more detail throughout the guide. And it's recommended that it may be necessary for a community to address the impact of historical trauma before initiating or discussing suicide prevention efforts. And it should be undertaken with full understanding of how an open discussion about current suicides can force an older generation to re-experience these painful events in their past. When we're talking about guilt, for families, the loss of a loved one is compounded by the guilt and shame and questions of what they did wrong or how they could have prevented it. These feelings can result in not wanting to talk with others and result in the suffering of family members, causing them to feel even more isolated. And not talking about suicide is a way to avoid their personal pain. It's appropriate that the person wishing to hold a suicide conversation within their community asks permission to bring up the topic or discuss an individual's grief. And prevention plans should include ceremonies and traditions that provide community members permission to release their collective grief. These should ensure that everyone is given support during these events and include conversations with counselors and traditional healers to provide follow-up support. Those experiencing a suicide crisis may use vague calls for help due to embarrassment. And the vagueness allows those concerned out of an embarrassing situation. But no matter how strong the politeness of a culture, the value of life should be stronger and should not prevent this person from asking someone directly if they're thinking about suicide. It may save a life.
Thank you, Kim.
Mm-hmm.
Move on here to our next set of holy.
So our next set of questions for seeking the wisdom of elders. Our first question is the community's language have a word or phrase to describe suicide?
And the next one is, are there any taboos in talking about suicide? Those are the two that we'd like you to be able to respond to. Does the community's language have a word or phrase to describe suicide? What have you learned, Kim?
It varied so much, you know. I mean, it's when we were gathering information for this guide, a lot of it seemed to be generational. So, you know, I think that the younger people were more open to having the discussion, where some elders were a little more resistant. But, you know, there was a big variation, and I think that's why the guide is so valuable in giving people the context for where these taboos lie and how to shape their work around them while being respectful.
Sure. BC said, in my Pawnee community, people definitely do not talk about suicide. I'm not sure if it's cultural, though, or more denial. Thanks, BC.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that in some communities, religion and religiousness has played a part in the barrier to a suicide conversation. You know, you imagine if your religion doesn't allow you to bury the individual in the cemetery, but they have to be buried outside. I mean, that just creates trauma every day. Dolly said, in our native tongue, we used to just ignore the word suicide because it was a taboo. Kim, you want to take the rest?
Sure. Lisa Schumann, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing anybody's name wrong. In our community, there is still a stigma of talking about suicide. Our program is getting the awareness out to the community that we must talk about it to prevent it. The next one is from Eugene Landlord. Suicide was never discussed among us, in our families and in our communities. We have Celeste Washington. I'm sure there is a word or phrase for suicide, but I don't know it. We do have a taboo on not to discuss it openly and never around family that has lost someone to suicide.
And what we're finding out in this guide and what we've learned is that having the conversation is very, very important. And we'll get to that a little bit in the next piece, Stigma, Fear, and Myths about Suicide.
Mm-hmm. I think we have a few more people typing.
Yeah. Let's give them a little bit of time. Anyone on our team have any responses to these questions they'd be happy to share? Kim, I see Francis Sotoma responded.
I can't see at the top, but it says the Passamaquoddy word for suicide. I'm sorry, it just disappeared.
Okay, the word suicide literally means to kill oneself. We're similar in that we don't talk about suicide. For example, when there's an overdose, even if it was intentional, the community talks about it as an overdose and not as a suicide. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it may be a car accident and that wasn't a suicide. You're right. Alyssa Jojola has got a response here. Can you see those, Kim?
I see Scott Barton. We do not have a word for suicide in our language. The taboo in our community is more denial and shame than a cultural issue. We have an outlook in our community that things that happen in the home stays in the home and not discussed outside of the home.
Alyssa Jojola, in one of the communities we work with, there's a lot of stigma in discussing suicide, more so among the elderly. The younger generations are realizing we must talk about it and address it. Absolutely. Josie, there was no for suicide. It was translated. They did themselves when it was translated. It was never talked about. It's still hard. Go ahead, Kim.
Dolly Holly we used to visit our family and do a Bible study in the 1970s after a tragedy. Now we stay away from that. Hunter we still have spirit feasts and ghost suppers. Some people believe speaking of someone that has passed is like trying to call them back. Roberta Monto says, traditionally in Yucatec culture, suicide was only a rite of elders. The word is translated as walking the land. The community would respect the elders' choice to walk away from the community and not look for them to save them. It wasn't an option for you.
Oh, thanks, Roberta.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have, it looks like a few more people are typing.
Okay, we'll give them an opportunity. The webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes, so we are still moving forward.
You know, in my experience from developing this guide and then working on the Native Aspirations Project, there was a real pushback, and, you know, this happens within my own community, that they don't want a discussion of a suicide prevention program or a suicide prevention plan. And the thought was that it would be difficult to get people to participate in that. But I felt like younger people were more open to just being very direct and saying, I want to know more about suicide. This has impacted, you know, a lot of my friends. So there's a generation shift in some communities.
Yeah, I've discovered that as well. And we need to honor those youth, and that's what these programs are there for, is to involve them in the prevention planning, in the strategic plan, that it doesn't come from just the elders or the adults, that the youth have a voice. Marcia Lovato, when the elders are sharing words and wisdom in our native language, the word always cover how to live their lives and to be happy. When the word suicide is used in our community, it's always ignored and not talked about. Eugene Landlord, just to be with a family and support them was just enough for our family. People didn't have to say anything sometimes. Yeah, just going and sitting with the family sometimes is the support they need at that time. Let's go ahead and move on. The next piece deals with stigma, fear, myths about suicide. The act of suicide certainly is surrounded by stigma. Many religions consider suicide a sin, and it's often reported as a crime. This stigma is present in how we describe it as committing suicide, which carries the same social disapproval when a person commits a crime or a sin. Those who have attempted suicide or those who have survived the death of a loved one prefer completed suicide or died by suicide instead of committing. Stigma of suicide is also confounded by the stigma of mental health illness and substance abuse, the risk factors most associated with suicide. It may be difficult for communities to talk about causes and prevention of suicide and how to treat these two disorders. So connecting with mental health and behavioral health and having kind of a wraparound approach is very important. Fear, it's a major barrier. Whether it's a concern that talking to someone at risk may push them over the edge, or that the conversation might plant the seed for suicidal action. That's a stigma. The stigma attached to suicide can to those in the community who have broken the silence or are at the forefront of prevention efforts. These individuals need your support. They may experience resentment for the attention the suicide conversation brings to contributing risk factors. Elders, healers, and other respected leaders can reach out to those engaged in prevention work by publicly supporting and promoting their efforts. That takes away some of that social disapproval. If you have the elders and you've got the leaders supporting this effort and saying, we need to have this conversation, we need to develop a plan, that's moving forward. Myths about suicide really interfere with this conversation. They're complicated by barriers, taboos, fears, and legitimate cultural considerations. It's important to be able to discuss suicide openly in order to develop a viable prevention plan. In the guide, you'll see 6 myths and truths about the suicide conversation. Go on to our next set of polling questions. And those are, go ahead. I can't see exactly the ones we chose.
We have the first one are, what are the traditional ways in which the community responded to a death by suicide, a sudden death, or another great loss?
And then the fourth one.
And then we have the fourth question. If someone became trapped in grief, how did the community help them?
Just doing this webinar and having this conversation and talking about myths and stigma has brought up some fear in me as I talk. And I think that's probably could be happening with other people. And know that we are a supportive network here. that can talk about these things, and maybe we need to continue this conversation long after this webinar. So traditional ways in which community responded to a death by suicide, sudden death, or other great loss. One of our traditional ways is someone is with the loved one from the time they pass and until the time they are buried in the ground. That's my community's way of handling it, that someone stays with them. And so we have wakes, which are 3 days, where the body comes to a longhouse or even to someone's home, and the family is allowed to grieve for 3 full days, and people come in and surround them and take care of them and bring food and allow them to do that grieving. I see some people are typing. One of the things we've learned also is that White Bison, Mending Broken Hearts training is one of the ways that communities are dealing with grief. Kim, do you want to take this one?
Sure. This is from Crystalline Lemieux. We would only have a year to grieve. Then we would have a potluck to do our final grieving, and then do things that would bring our spirits up during the second half of the potluck. So people would share happy stories, jokes, happier songs. We did gift giving too. So traditionally, I'm not sure they would do if someone was trapped in grief. My assumption is that they would see the shaman, but I don't know what the shamans would do. I have to do some digging and research to find out.
I'd love to find out more.
Yeah. The second one is from Josephine Edmond. Traditional debriefing, helping them to know that they are not alone, give support and presence. You know, I know from my own personal upbringing, people may have not, that I grew up with, may have not directly talked about suicide or, you know, had a direct conversation about it. And I know that our community is very close, and everybody always came together, whether that meant coming together at somebody's home. Like Gary mentioned, our wakes are 3 days. They're in that person's home, and just the outpouring of community support through food and physical presence, taking over other, you know, needs of the family, either financially and, you know, helping out around the home. It's you know, it's incredible, and I think that's something that's very unique to many Native communities. Even though we may not be, you know, the best at directly addressing the issue, we all tend to come together as a community in these situations.
Yeah, and after the wake and after the service, for a year, the family prepares to do a giveaway on the anniversary of their death and bring together items from the person who has passed and remember those that helped during the wake and cooked and were there, and they honor them at the giveaway and give them something of the person who has passed. I see you, Jean.
Oh, I think they just, can you, is it possible to scroll up? I think some of them.
There we go. Can you see that?
I see Dolly.
Eugene, the Grief Healing Circle was reintroduced recently and found out this is an effective way to vent and help find some sort of acceptance. Elders are the most effective. They have a lot of money.
Dolly has, we would gather together and talk about the good sides of the person. It was impossible to just avoid the person who had died. We visited them daily or had a friend keep an eye on the families. Sharon Alexi shared, if we had a community member trapped in grief and they had a family member lost to suicide, YKHC would come to debrief to avoid contagion and follow one-on-one sessions to become available with the clinician. We have tribal workers doing healing circles or to monitor the well-being and Native connections. We would invite them to our events and activities to expand bonds within our community. You know, I know many communities.
Oh, go ahead.
I know many communities right now are having issues with substance abuse and opioid abuse, you know, and we know substance abuse is directly related to suicide. Many communities are having fires, continual fires for people to go, to have a safe place to go, to talk about their mental health and their substance abuse, and giving them safe places to have the conversation, you know, if they are feeling suicidal or if they just lost a loved one, where they can feel safe about having these conversations without feeling guilty or judged. There's one in the Oneida community in Wisconsin. It has become so successful. They built a physical building where they were having the fires, the tents and the fires, and now it is like a permanent structure for people to go.
I think we've got one last comment there from Celeste.
Celeste says, the body stays in the house or the relative's house big enough for viewing. People bring food for the family and those who pay their respects. On the third day, we usually have a funeral. 40 days later, we have a feast to honor the lost one. The community all works together to make sure everything is taken care of for the family. If someone is dealing with grief, someone always stays with them and makes sure that they're safe.
Yeah, I know for me, growing up in very in German heritage, that side of me, we weren't allowed to cry. Don't let Grandpa see you cry. Be strong. Those are the messages that I was given my whole life. And at 35, I moved back to the reservation and went to my first wake. And it was such a profound awakening for me that someone was saying, it's okay to feel. It's okay to laugh. It's okay to cry. It's okay to do those things. Here's how culturally we do it. It has really helped with my awareness and my healing when someone passes. Thank you all for taking time to allow yourself to be part of this conversation. And in summary, we just explored some of the myths and barriers to suicide conversation. We examined how suicide reflects the many cultural forces that shape the lives of young people. And we explored some of the cultural issues around prevention. Now, we would like to open it up for questions. BC, do you want to facilitate that piece?
Yeah, Gary, thank you. Sorry, apologize for the delay. So if anyone has any questions, please enter them in the chat box. And I'd actually like to start with a question I have for both Gary and Kim and our attendees to answer in the chat box if they can. But I think if we've seen anything from our responses here from our participants, it's that there is still a lot of hesitancy to discuss suicide in our communities. And I tend to think it does come from our elders and some of our adult folks. I feel youth are really willing to start talking about it, but they find barriers to do that because of the hesitation from their adult population there. How do you see us breaking that down? It's not our youth we need to get to start talking about it, it's the adults. How can we make that change?
For me, I think having these to live to see the great day that dawns available in the community and bring community together to just begin having this discussion, and the youth asking these questions of the elders is a way to get things started in a good way. Kim?
Yeah, and adding to that, I think one of, from my own experience, my personal experience, and also my professional experience, there's immediate pushback about directly talking about suicide. But when you start having the conversation and you talk about mental health and physical well-being and substance abuse, the things that are tied to suicide, people start talking, and especially elders who are resistant to having the direct conversation seem to open up once you talk about the broader, sort of risk factors associated with suicide. And then they start to look at it like a little bit differently. And there's points in the guide that highlight that, and that I think that's where the polling questions that we went over, and there are like many, many more in the guide that are useful in starting that conversation, but also getting people to look at it from a different perspective, looking at the what contributes to the suicide or the person contemplating suicide.
Great, yeah. Another thing that I know happens in my community, which is Pawnee, it's a small tribal community in Oklahoma, is there is indirect, I guess I would call it indirect suicide. There's substance use and misuse to the point of someone is doing this intentionally to, complete suicide, but they're not doing it in what we would call a typical suicide fashion. How do we begin to address this? Is, in our community, people aren't seeing it as a suicide. They just are in denial that is a suicide.
Well, and another thing that we just had a conversation about this morning was suicide by cop. And there's a case in Sacramento right now where an individual, for example, may have had a weapon, and the police responded, and he showed the weapon, and he maybe threatened the cop, and the cop shot him. So people might not think that was a suicide, that maybe it was a cop killing, for example. But the individual perhaps chose that method so that maybe if they had these fears or stigma around all of it, that this would take care of it, that the cop shooting would take care of it. And there's a lot of information out there about that as well. Now, I see Dolly has said, I wondered why there are so many suicides happening in our villages and why it is harder to reach out to our people. When a long time ago, our elders knew how to talk to you one-on-one to help you cope with suicide ideation. Our past elders always know what is happening with your own inner self, and they immediately reach out to you. I think some of the historical trauma, the intergenerational trauma, the other things that have happened in the last 50 to 75 years or 100 years in our communities, and not talking about those kind of traumas that we're not healing from, have really been a barrier.
Gary?
Go for it, Hunter.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. The community where I live, we still have the Indian boarding schools that are still standing here, and many of our relatives, including both my grandparents, went to that school away from home. And there was another Indian boarding school, a Catholic Indian mission boarding school that was northern Michigan, and my brother and sister attended that school. It wasn't until many years later, in fact, I don't even know if my mom and my sister have still spoken about the abandonment that my sister felt. And I didn't know that until I was actually doing a presentation and training on historical trauma in this community at a honoring, healing, and remembering event at the boarding school. And so I share that because I think a lot of our people have suppressed a lot of those memories, a lot of that hurt, a lot of that pain, a lot of that anger, abandonment, maybe betrayal, whatever, they might be feeling. And so, as a dad, I grew up without a dad, but as a father of 3 sons, I take it very seriously to open up those doors of communication starting in the home, so that those things that many of the generations older than us may be uncomfortable even discussing or talking about, because it gets down into the feelings and the emotions. Some of those hard subjects are things that I try to make it safe in my home to talk about anything and everything and put it on the table and try to make it safe so that we can start to begin breaking those cycles and patterns. So I just wanted to share that and echo what you're saying. Miigwech.
Well, what we've learned in the work that we've done and are doing is that those are passed down in our DNA. If we're not dealing with them, we pass them on to our children and our grandchildren. And if our grandchildren are feeling emotional or angry or rageful or something, they're carrying that trauma that their ancestor experienced. And we're learning that it's so important to be able to have a safe place to do that trauma, intergenerational trauma work, to begin to not pass it on and to break that cycle. Eugene Landlord said, "We were taught not to show feelings. That was a sign of weakness. This is very important, and people need to be taught, especially men, to talk about their feelings. Suppression is not healthy." Thank you, Eugene. And I'm hearing that a lot in some of the villages I work with, that they want more circles for the men to have these conversations and safe places. It's something that is not happening, and they really want it to. So thank you, Eugene, for mentioning that.
Thank you, Gary. Dolly has a comment. Dolly has another comment. Note that in the past, parents allowed you to talk to elder aunts and uncles, and when they spoke to you, that would bring healing to your inner soul and spirit. And she asked, why is it hard to reach out to the younger generation these days? And someone would rather suffer than ask someone else for help.
I think it speaks to maybe some of that lateral violence that we're learning about. If you can't do anything about what's happening above you, about the leaders or something, and you're angry about something, you're going to take it out on those around you. And we're finding that's not the healthiest way to be. So we're not going to talk. We're not going to have the conversation. We're not going to allow a healing circle or those kinds of things. It takes great strength for someone in the community, and I honor anyone who does this, that steps up and says, I'm going to have a healing circle every 2 weeks in my community, and if no one shows up, fine, but I'm going to be there. It's a safe place that people can come and talk. And these have been some of the circles that people have brought this guide and have sat down and started the discussion by just asking these questions. seeking advice from the elders.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, this is Kim. When this guide was developed, social media was just sort of, coming into prominence, and so there's not a lot mentioned in the guide. But I think that it's important to think about the ways that social media has changed the way youth communicate and how they express their feelings, and also to look at how do you respond to the ideation or the comments that they make that are obviously seeking help. It's also important to consider. It may contribute to why it seems like younger people are not reaching out directly to other generations or to a person who can give them support, because it's changed the way that they communicate with each other.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. That's very important to what's happening today. Our youth have got a different way of communicating, and we need to learn that way, and we need to listen. We asked a group of youth one time, how do you know that you've been heard by an adult? We got some powerful information.
Gary, Crystalline is asking if there's are lesson plans that they can use to teach about boarding school.
I know that gathering of Native Americans or gathering of Alaska Natives, the 3-day GONA or GOAN process, is one of the ways to process that intergenerational and boarding school trauma. The Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition is also another resource that are doing a lot of work on this as well.
Great. So maybe that's something you can, Crystalline would be able to find on Google. Can you say that name again, Gary, please?
Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And Crystalline, my email is at the end of this, and you're certainly welcome to send me an email, and I can send you information about that.
Yeah, there aren't any lesson plans in the guide, but there's multiple resources. And the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition is an excellent resource.
And it may be time to update the guide. It's several, and the resources and links are not current. So.
Yeah, I wanted to add that before we got off the call that there's an entire section on curriculum that people that are either created directly for Native American communities, and then some that have been adapted, some that are just for like a universal population. And they've all were in NREP, which is the resource of best practices, evidence-based practices on SAMHSA. That directory is no longer available. So I took out a few that had been utilized in the communities that we had worked with, and they've been adapted quite a bit, and put new links on them. The Suicide Prevention Resource Center actually archived a lot of those, but it takes a little bit of effort in looking what the Suicide Prevention Resource Center archived and then checking the links that they included for the curriculum. But if anyone has any questions, they feel free to contact me or Gary, and we can help you in tracking down a particular curriculum or training that you're or resource that you're interested in. I mean, I still have all the studies and things that were referenced throughout the book in my own personal database. So if anyone is in need of anything, I'd be happy to share.
Thank you, Kim. And it sounds like the conversation needs to continue. We have another webinar in August about responding to suicide and the community readiness process and community action. So look forward to that. And if you've got suggestions or thoughts on how to make this particular conversation work better in our communities, please don't hesitate to email us. DC, do you want to kind of wrap us up here?
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I appreciate you and Kim joining us today for this, and all of our participants. As you saw in the previous slide, there's a link here to get the guide. You can download it in the files box here. It's in the PowerPoint. Additionally, Kim prepared some updated suicide prevention resources. That document is also in the files box. You click on them and the download files button will come up, and it will allow you to directly receive that. If you'd like multiple copies of the guide, you're more than welcome to email Gary. He did mention the upcoming part 2 of this conversation will be on August 6th. Time's flying, but not that fast. Here's our presenter contact information for both Gary and Kim. You're more than welcome to contact either one of them or your grantee technical assistant, and they'll be happy to answer any questions or put you in touch with the appropriate people. Additionally, we have some upcoming webinars. These are more in relation to your grant. You can see on March 19th, the 3 Ps, Building Blocks of Procedure, Protocol, and Policy, following in April and May with 2 webinars about SAP implementation. So we definitely hope you will join us for those. And finally, again, we thank you for joining us. A survey will open automatically once the session ends. I do want to share some information about a special event we're preparing. National Prevention Week is coming up. That's going to be May 13th through May 17th, 2019, and it will be dedicated to increasing public awareness of mental health and/or substance use disorders. As part of this observance, the Native Connections TTA team is hosting a digital storytelling festival, and we hope you might think about making a submission for that. We have a proposal form that you would need to complete outlining what your story might be, and that is due on Thursday, March 21st. The final product is due on Friday, April 13th, and we have held a informational webinar already on February 28th, and the recording is on a website. I'm going to post that here in just 1 second, so you can go to that and get a little bit more information about that. But a second webinar will be held on Tuesday, April 2nd, at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, you can contact your grantee technical assistant for more information, or visit the National Prevention Week Digital Storytelling Community site, which is this link that I just posted in the chat box. They'll have more information on submission guidelines and tools to help develop your digital story and other SAMHSA resources that you might want to use. Until then, we appreciate you joining us as always, and we look forward to you joining us for our next webinar.